It is officially, as of today, the Marie Antoinette presidency. While 42 million Americans go without critically important food assistance and millions more struggle with huge increases in the cost of everything from rent to health care to what Donald Trump himself describes as, quote, the grocery. The president, who was elected in large part because of the price of eggs and Donald Trump's promise over and over and over again that he would bring the prices down, says, well, let them eat well-done steak. Here's what he actually said last night in response to questions about the public's growing concern that the Trump administration is doing nothing to lower the cost of living.
I call the Democrats con men and women. They make up numbers. But when you look at 25% reduction in costs for Thanksgiving between Biden and me, meaning this administration, that's a tremendous number. It's the biggest reduction in cost in the history of that chart or whatever it is they do. That they do a synopsis of everything. They cover every element of Thanksgiving meals. 25% down. So I don't want to hear about the affordability because right now we're much less.
None of that is true. But there you have it in a nutshell. Trump saying, in effect, just stop talking about it. As we reported right here yesterday, that specific thing he said about that specific meal at Walmart, the Thanksgiving basket that they market. Trump's talked about it now 2 days in a row, but either he's intentionally lying or nobody told him that when you look not even at the fine print, but at the items in the basket, it has half as many items, including no pecan pie, no brand name items, literally 29 items in last year's basket when Biden was president, 15 in the Trump Thanksgiving dinner basket from Donald Trump. And so the reason it costs less is because it has literally half as many items. In other words, it's another example of what I guess we can now describe as Trump's economic policy, make do with less. It's his policy for girls or boys and their dolls. It's his policy for Thanksgiving dinner. And the fact that he can't stop talking about it may actually be the bigger part of the story, that we can now see his desperation and frustration. Trump can't spin the problem away. The rising cost of living, the rising cost of groceries, the rising cost of the things people need for their families is our new reality. And it's been going on for long enough that everybody feels it. Millions of people every day, whether they're at the grocery store or at Walmart or paying their bills or paying for their health care. Just ask Marjorie Taylor Greene.
When the president says there's virtually no inflation and that grocery prices are going down, do you agree with him on that?
No, I go to the grocery store myself. Grocery prices remain high. Energy prices are high. My electricity bills are higher here in Washington, D.C. at my apartment, and they're also higher at my house in Rome, Georgia, higher than they were a year ago. So affordability is a problem. But when I go back home and I talk to many of my constituents, I'm hearing stories of not only are we having a really hard time affording groceries and rent and things like that, but I'm also hearing stories about people maxing out their credit cards just to afford their monthly expenses.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. Didn't have this on my bingo card, but she is one of the loudest and most prominent people in the MAGA world to now represent very publicly, she's in an interview there on CNN, a crack in that coalition. The facade of a unified Republican Party is a thing of the past, at least right now. There are cracks. And on the face of voter rage, which translated into devastating double-digit defeats for Republicans from coast to coast on Tuesday, discontent is simmering inside the GOP against Trump and his very public and brazen displays, an agenda of gilding things with gold and taking bulldozers to the White House to do a multi-million-dollar renovation as Americans struggle to put food on the table. Former Republican Senator Jeff Flake writes in the Washington Post this, quote, "The political climate that once rewarded absolute loyalty to the president is shifting. The Democratic landslide in Tuesday's off-year elections will only add momentum to that. The midterms, now less than a year away, clearly favor the Democrats, particularly in the House, where they are poised to take the majority. And if that happens, it will not be because Democrats have suddenly found the perfect message. It will be because the president's economic policies are fundamentally misaligned with both conservative principles and economic reality. The sudden and dramatic backlash to Donald Trump's deeply out-of-touch presidency and approach to the economy is where we start today. Host of the Fast Politics podcast, Vanity Fair special correspondent, MSNBC political analyst Molly Jong-Fast is back. Also with us at the table, the Reverend Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and the host of Politics Nation on MSNBC. And MSNBC senior White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is here. Oh, Vaughn, we have so many things to ask you about. But let me start with you, Molly, and this incredible split screen. I mean, I think when you saw the policies, when you saw the tariff rollout, when you heard Trump acknowledge in the transition a year ago that the prices were not going to come down, you knew, unfortunately, that people's economic anxieties were going to worsen. But no one could have predicted the actual gilding of the Oval Office, the actual grifting for millions of dollars to make a ballroom for whom those answers in that story only creates a more enraging split screen for the American people.
If you had said to voters, he's going to tear down the East Wing, he's going to obliterate the legacy of Eleanor Roosevelt and all of the first ladies that came before her, people would have said you were crazy.
Yeah, but if you told them eggs would be $1.50, they'd say whatever.
Right.
The fact is they're $10.
Right. And a lot of the inflation is because of his tariffs, right? Like, he is actually doing things to make it worse, right? Yeah. It's not that he's fighting it. It's also that he's making it worse. And I would say, like, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who knows? You know, she's a politician, so she's an opportunist, but she sees an opportunity here. And we haven't seen that before. And I think that is, and Jeff Flake writes about this in this op-ed, which is like, she sees an opportunity because she sees a split between the populism and the royal ballroom.
I think that used to be a flank protected by Steve Bannon. The truth about Donald Trump's economy is that no one will be spared from it, right? Either your premiums are going to surge or you're going to be kicked off of Medicaid, 11 to 17 million people, or you're pissed every time you go to Walmart or the grocery store. If you do your grocery shopping and your sort of, whatever you buy for your kids or your family, everything is more expensive. And this Thanksgiving meal, he's talked about it 2 days in a row. We did the full fact check yesterday, and I welcome the opportunity to do it again. And every time he tells that lie, it's the most easily disproven lie. It had 29 items in it last year. It has 15 in it this year.
And he tries to mislead people with misinformation like it won't be checked. Somebody needs to tell him he's president. Whatever you say, he's going to be checked. But I think that what adds insult to injury, yes, when you look at the $10 eggs, yes, when you look at the fact that people are not given a fair share in terms of what they are used to with premiums and need. I mean, we're talking about people's health care now. We're not talking about a luxury. But to add insult to injury, on top of that, on top of government workers on food lines, literally, you're going to throw a Great Gatsby theme party? I mean, this is how he responds. People are lined up for food, government workers, and you're having a Gatsby party for the rich on top of you tearing down east wing of the White House so you and your friends can have a ballroom. So, I mean, I don't even think it's fair to Marie Antoinette to say let them eat cake. She didn't build a ballroom and she didn't have a Gatsby party while people were starving.
I apologize to Marie Antoinette.
This is absolute. This is a whole nother level. It's almost like you not only don't empathize with the people that are in need, which are most Americans now. It's like you hold them in contempt. I'm going to show you how unconcerned and insensitive I am. I'm going to party hardy at Mar-a-Lago till they get my ballroom ready. Oh, y'all online? Well, let me just explain that away. And then sit up in the press conference while people take turns lying to back up his false statistics.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Here's a question for you on this Friday night of the worst political week for Donald Trump since he got back into office 10 months ago. Why is it that the president of the United States thinks groceries is an old-fashioned word?
I do say this, beef we have to get down. I think of groceries. You know, it's an old-fashioned word, but it's a beautiful word. I went on groceries. It's a very simple word, groceries. Like almost, you know, who uses the word? I started using the word, the groceries. When you buy apples, when you buy bacon, when you buy eggs, they would double and triple the price over a short period of time.
And, you know, we lowered the cost of groceries. A simple word like that, groceries, it was like almost a strange word. I hadn't heard the word in so long, but what could be more beautiful than the word grocery?
Now, we've been playing these clips of him for a while now, and beyond just the total weirdness of it, if you take a moment to just think about why he thinks this way, the answer is obvious, right? Donald Trump is an extremely rich man, always has been. He's just never had to think about groceries in his entire life. The word itself just does not come up ever. Like, Donald Trump's not like spending a Sunday night, like going to the supermarket to make sure the fridge is stocked for the week, like pushing a shopping cart up and down the aisles, checking with spaghetti sauces on sale, carrying the bags out to the car, come home, fill the fridge. No. I mean, I don't think he's probably ever done that in his life. He's never had to even consider the thing that most people have front of mind all the time, the groceries. Of course, this is not a new observation. We all know this about Donald Trump. But in this moment, when the price of groceries and everything else is the most salient political issue, it is a pretty bad look to look this out of touch. There's a political cost for a look this bad. If you're older enough to remember, this might remind you of that time in 1992 when President George Herbert Walker Bush made a campaign appearance at a grocers convention. Groceries, such a beautiful word. And seemed amazed by the scanner thing they had at the checkout counter.
He was in Florida yesterday talking to a meeting of the National Grocers Association. He called opponents of his economic plan professional pessimists. And he took a line from an ad campaign saying that reports that the economy has fallen and can't get up are just bunk. The president also got a chance to see a supermarket checkout scanner in action. Kind of seemed as though he'd never really seen one of those before, and the president said that he was amazed.
Now, to be really fair here, Bush was actually just impressed by a new model of scanner, which could even read damaged barcodes. But the gaffe, and again, these were really simpler times, reinforced his image, the out-of-touch Ivy League scion of a wealthy Connecticut senator, which he was. And that moment turned out to be one of the all-time greatest political disasters, and it sure did not help Bush when he lost his re-election campaign to Bill Clinton in the "it's the economy, stupid" election of 1992. But at least George Bush was aware there were things called groceries that people need. The current president thinks it's something from like the horse and buggy days. And we have been talking this week about how much good old-fashioned politics, just the normal politics of a democracy, can make a difference in combating this Trump administration as it attempts to steamroll through our democracy. And we saw it on Tuesday night. And it is amazing to watch Trump and his people make it worse and worse and worse at the worst possible political moment for him. It's as if the administration is on a mission to make sure every American knows that he is, in fact, an elderly, out-of-touch rich guy who just does not care about you. I mean, just yesterday, the guy was quite literally asleep on the job, right in the middle of a televised White House event, only to wake up from his midday snooze when a guy collapsed right next to him in the Oval Office. That is the trademark face of a guy who just wants to get back to sleep. When the president is actually awake, his administration is publicly fighting to this day as hard as it can, to this very minute, to take SNAP benefits away from hungry Americans so they can't afford their beautiful groceries heading into Thanksgiving. In fact, just within the last few minutes, they asked the Supreme Court to weigh in, which could happen any moment now, to make it possible for them not to send SNAP benefits. We played this last night, but watch when a Fox News reporter asked Trump about this, and he just passes the hot potato to J.D. Vance.
A federal judge said tonight that the administration has to fully fund SNAP. It's the latest in the back and forth, and the Justice Department said they're going to appeal it. What's your message to folks as they work this out in the courts and in Congress as we're heading into Thanksgiving?
You want to go with that?
Yeah, look, Jackie, it's an absurd ruling because you have a federal judge effectively telling us what we have to do in the midst of a Democrat government shutdown, which what we'd like to do is for the Democrats to open up the government. Of course, then we can fund SNAP, and we can also do a lot of other good things for the American people.
It's absurd. Of course, there's already a $5 billion contingency fund legally required, people argue, to be used in this situation. Now, Trump did end up weighing in on the matter with one hell of a Thanksgiving message to the American people.
You know, one other thing, our country has to remain very liquid because problems, catastrophes, wars, could be anything. We have to remain liquid. We can't give everything away based on a number. I don't want to hear about the affordability because right now we're much less.
Our country has to remain liquid because of the emergencies and can't not because of just a number. And I don't want to hear about affordability. Are you people still talking about affordability? Didn't we get past this? It's like when the Epstein issue blew up, Trump cannot escape the issue, and everything he says seems to make it worse.
I want the Republicans to keep control of Congress in 2026, but something has to be done fast. I don't see the best economy right now. Wall Street numbers do not reflect my Main Street money. Please do something, President Trump. So I guess what do you say to Regina and people like her?
Well, I do say this. Beef we have to get down. I think of groceries. You know, it's an old-fashioned word, but it's a beautiful word. Beef we have to get down, but we've got prices way down. And I have energy down to 5-6-year lows now.
You think prices are coming down from this?
I believe that. Yeah, I think they're coming down, but I think they're down already. I think the biggest problem is Republicans don't talk about it.
He just can't say groceries without meta commentary. Oh, look at that. There is that word again. The one I invented, maybe the old-fashioned one. I mean, in point of fact, the prices have not come down, right? Inflation has actually accelerated since around April when he announced all his tariffs. It's going up. People understand that. It hasn't come down. Certainly, that's a complete lie. But more importantly, he just isn't concerned. He does not care about affordability. He either doesn't care or he doesn't understand how bad his political optics are in the midst of all this. It is a bad look to tear down the White House East Wing to build a fancy new gilded ballroom or to post 25 photos of your new bathroom. 25. Just every angle, every way you could look at it. In the midst of a government shutdown while the air traffic controllers are working without pay. It's truly a Hall of Fame bad look on the day that SNAP funding lapsed and 42 million Americans had their lives upended to be hosting a Great Gatsby-themed party at his palatial golf home in Florida filled with West Palm Beach rich folks dressed up like it's the Roaring '20s. You remember The Great Gatsby, of course, the novel about the idle rich people on Long Island who throw hollow gilded parties to show off their lavish wealth just before the country collapsed into the worst depression it's ever seen. All this is not going unnoticed. Sometimes it feels like no one notices this stuff, but this is getting noticed. This was the message that was projected in Washington, D.C. this week. Trump parties at Mar-a-Lago while 42 million go hungry. It's no wonder why Republicans are starting to feel some political pressure.
Joining us now, we have staff writer for The Atlantic and MSNBC political contributor Mark Leibovich, New York Times opinion columnist David French, senior writer at The Dispatch and MSNBC contributor David Drucker, and staff writer for The New Yorker, Susan Glasser. Welcome to all of you. David French, to you first. Has the GOP migration begun, as former Senator Jeff Flake is claiming? I mean, how accurate is his assessment?
I'm going to say it's possibly accurate, but it's premature. I do think there are signs of division within the MAGA coalition, without question. And it's not just political division in the sense of our congressmen and senators and members of the House willing to break with the president. You're seeing some divisions around things like the Epstein files. You've seen division within the right over Tucker Carlson, for example. So fault lines are forming. The cracks are definitely showing. But the reality is Trump is still the absolute monarch of the Republican Party. And I don't think the off-year elections really change that, because I think he still can absolutely end almost any Republican presidential or any Republican political career that he wants to end. And I think you'll see the migration happen the moment that members of Congress understand or believe that Trump actually isn't in control of their fate any longer. Until that moment happens, we might see a little bit of breakage here and there and on the edges, but the ship of GOP state is going to keep sailing under Trump until Trump is not the one who decides their future.
David Drucker, I want to play what Texas Republican Chip Roy had to say. This was on Steve Bannon's podcast. Take a listen.
We've got to start getting serious about this. In this election, let's be very clear. This is a wake-up call that if you don't lead and lead with a clear vision and a clear direction, you're going to get absolutely slaughtered. Lead with something people can sink their teeth into. People are tired of not being able to afford housing. They're tired of not being able to afford groceries.
Let's throw in health care. And what about what we just heard from Senator Schumer and Senator Peters backing him up about 30 minutes ago when they said, look, what we're going to offer is a one-year extension. That's all. We're trying to buy time. We're going to back off from trying to fix the ACA subsidies and lock them in permanently so that we can have a bipartisan negotiation. What's the reaction that going to be like within the Republican Party? What should it be?
Well, look, I think it was tactically smart on the part of Minority Leader Schumer to make the first move and show Republicans and really show voters, because that's who the target audience here is, that they're interested in reopening the government and they're willing to compromise. And however Republicans want to couch the compromise as a non-compromise, as, a lot of smoke and mirrors, it doesn't matter. I think what a lot of voters are going to hear is these guys are willing to move off their maximal position to do something that I want them to do anyway. So that was a very smart move. I think Republicans are in a position coming out of this election where they have to get themselves back to a place that they were heading into the 2024 election, which was focused intently on voters' number one issue, and that was inflation. Right? Every poll we see shows that voters have a number of priorities, but that their number one priority, the one that's squeezing them the most, is the cost of living across the board, right? And that's why so many of these candidates were talking about affordability. And when you look at the polling, it's not just that people are unhappy with the president's performance on the economy, and of course presidents get more blame and credit than they deserve. It's that they don't feel he's been focused enough on it. And there are two things that you do not want to do in politics, but one in particular, because you may be trying to fix the economy and fail. But if voters think that you are not sufficiently focused on it, then you're in a world of hurt politically. And the polling that we saw in October leading into Tuesday's election was not just that people were unhappy with the economy and the president's stewardship of the economy, and that's a problem in and of itself. They felt that the president was focused on other things. One last thing I'll mention here. I think in retrospect, it has to be said that Speaker Johnson's decision to keep House Republicans, to keep the House out of session for the last month plus has backfired, because what American people see, forget the American people, what voters in these targeted races see is that the majority party in Congress, in one of the chambers of Congress, is not showing up for work. And that visual, I think, has to be looked at now as a mistake, even if Republicans want to say that they did their job by passing a government funding bill before the government shut down, which they did.
Mark, I want to read a little bit more from former Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, who wrote in the Washington Post, Republicans running in midterm races are going to face a choice. They can cling, as many Democrats did in 2024, to an economic message that ignores reality, or they can begin the slow, necessary work of reclaiming the party of free markets and global engagement. Republicans most likely to lead this migration are those senators not on the ballot in 2026. So, Mark, one could argue that more Republicans were speaking out against Trump after January 6th than they were today. But your assessment of where Republicans are now, just a year out from the midterms, how do you see it?
Well, first of all, I mean, I do think that there's a fundamental difference between the Republican sort of migration away from Trump after January 6th and the beginnings that we may or may not be seeing now, which is that Donald Trump was, in fact, he was not a lame duck in 2021. I mean, it looked like he had no shot of ever coming back to the White House. Lo and behold, he did. But he asserted his own viability and his own potency basically 6 months later when he said that, look, I'll probably run again. And it's, all of a sudden he was the front runner almost from the beginning. And so like that itself was the definition of power. And obviously everyone had to respect that. Today, he is a lame duck. Now, lame duck is a word that I'm sure he hates and has been trying to like postpone for as much as possible. The fact is, he's more of a lame duck today, much more of a lame duck today than he was a week ago. And he was able, really, in the first year of his term, to kind of cruise on the momentum he had. And I think the lingering and still very real fear that a lot of people, certainly in Congress, the Republicans in Congress, have of him and of his voters. But that dissipates by the day, not just because of the economic numbers, but just because of time. And look, he's providing a lot of fodder for people who think he is checking out, whether it's the pictures of the ballroom or the destruction of the East Wing, or the Great Gatsby thing, and any number of things that he's doing that looks like he's not focused on what his job should be right now.
And let's keep in mind the Supreme Court's going to weigh in on the validity, the legality of his tariffs. So that's a huge component as well. Susan, I'm saving the best for last year, because in your New Yorker piece titled "America Begins Clapping Back at Donald Trump," you write about the elections, but also the death of Dick Cheney and retirement of Nancy Pelosi. And in that context, you say the clock is ticking for Trump. The president himself knows it. He blamed Tuesday's losses on the fact that he was not on the ballot to rally Republicans, but he did not mention a larger constitutional truth about his lame duck status that neither he nor his party seems to have begun reckoning with. He won't be on the ballot heading the ticket ever again. So why should a post-Trump election worry Republicans?
Well, I think, Donald Trump prescribes himself as the cure to all that ails both his party and America, right? And so if you have one of our two political parties that has been sort of reorganized over the last decade to be a party that supports and is about the promotion of a single person, and that person is going to exit the scene, then what is your party going to be about? Very striking, for example, to listen to you quote from Jeff Flake, the former senator's op-ed there. He says, well, we've got to get the Republican Party to return to free markets and things like that. Not the Donald Trump Republican Party. Donald Trump, regardless of how the Supreme Court rules on his tariffs, and that oral arguments this week certainly suggested they're not leaning toward adopting the administration's view of his authorities under a particular law. But there are other ways for Donald Trump to oppose tariffs. He's not going to go back to a free market status, and the Republican Party is his Republican Party. So then we come back to this very important point of, as long as he has the power to decide which Republicans can win a primary, which Republicans can lose a primary, then he retains control over these people. The remarkable thing for this historically unpopular president is not that there's a little bleat of difference here and there, but how united they've been, given, in fact, A, how unpopular Donald Trump is with the general public, B, how unpopular many of his policies are. It's not just that he personally is seen as divisive, as was the case in his first term, but now on issues like the economy, and even in some surveys on immigration, things that were the strengths of Donald Trump that got him reelected in 2024, even now those policies of Trump's are polling very, very poorly. And yet you see very few Republicans breaking with him. It's interesting to hear Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's kind of out MAGA-ing, the head of MAGA right now by talking about these populist themes that Donald Trump, he seems heedless and indifferent to political consequence. And maybe that's because he isn't going to run anymore.
You bring up Marjorie Taylor Greene. Let me just pose this question to you, David French. How genuine is her criticism, or do you think there's some ulterior motive that's driving her? I mean, what is she doing?
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a very ambitious politician, and she's not term limited. She is not in the Trump position where this is the last rodeo for Trump. There's a big future for her, she hopes and thinks. And so what you're going to see are more people doing what she's doing, where they're going to stake out a particular kind of ground that might be distinct without formally divorcing themselves from Donald Trump. She's not doing that, but she is staking out some distinct ground. She's a very ambitious politician. This isn't hard to figure out. There's going to be a different Republican standard bearer in 2028. As crazy as this sounds, I think she might sometimes have some designs on the Oval Office. And so she's got to forge some sort of identity beyond just Trump sycophant, perhaps. And so I think it's not going to be hard to figure out the motivations as we see these next 3 years unfold. You're going to see an awful lot of people with their own ambitions emerging and without necessarily distancing themselves from Donald Trump. And that's going to be a delicate dance.
Can you imagine being so weak in the presidential posture that you would be able to step forward and say publicly, I can't win? Right? That's what we're seeing right now out of this president. He's saying, I need to gerrymander to win. He's calling up Greg Abbott and saying, I need you to gerrymander your state as much as possible. My ideas are failing. My economy is a disaster. And I need you to cheat as hard as you can. He's having J.D. Vance fly back and forth from the Indianapolis airport like it's a hub for Air Force Two, and trying to do everything they possibly can to squeeze as many seats via cheating out as possible. Whereas they could be spending their time trying to solve problems for the American people, trying to lower drug costs or lower the food costs, lower inflation, but they're not, because they can't. So this is what they got left, and they're trying everything they can to do it.
Speaking of everything they can, Abba, you had California Republicans challenging the Prop 50 results. Your sense of where this challenge is headed?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is I think the third challenge brought by these lawyers against Prop 50, trying to stop what's happening in California, even though what's happening in California is a direct response to what's happened already in Texas. So the first two failed. I have every reason to expect this is also going to fail. I certainly understand the Republicans are upset about what California did, but this is something of their own making. And certainly, we have litigation going on in Texas, including claims that say these kinds of mid-decade redraws that Texas began are flatly unconstitutional. But unless and until a court, and specifically the Supreme Court, tells us that, then California voters have spoken up and said that they need to fight fire with fire. And that's exactly what California has done.
John, what's the balance being weighed here? Gavin Newsom, who's making his way to Texas, is making the case that other states like Maryland, they need to start moving their own processes along for redistricting. Well, in places like Kansas and we noted Indiana, the efforts have stalled for Republicans, at least to a certain extent. We know in Florida, though, we believe their legislative committees are still working to try to potentially get 2 more Republican seats out of the redistricting effort there. Do Democrats risk potentially igniting a Republican effort that if one state moves forward, like Maryland, for instance? I know Illinois Governor Pritzker has said they're waiting to see what Indiana does. But if there is an aggressive effort, as Gavin Newsom is suggesting, is there a risk at play that Republicans will counter in an even more meaningful way?
Look, I think it's important to remember no one wanted this. Donald Trump picked up the phone and called Greg Abbott, as we were talking about earlier with Simone, right? That's where this started. And unfortunately, we're all find ourselves in this current crisis, and we need to push. Republicans have not stopped at any point during this process, and they've been trying to drive a maximalist strategy across every single state they can possibly drive. And what we're seeing on the Democratic side is a revolution, a movement among people that are trying to stop it, right? You're talking, just like Abba just said, we're seeing maps on the Republican side, frankly, that are illegal or unconstitutional, and that will get litigated in court. Whereas on the Democratic side, like California, it's going to the people. The voters get to decide, and look at the results that came in on Tuesday, right? We're talking about 8 million people that showed up to an election that they didn't even know was going to happen 3 months before that, because they aren't going to let Donald Trump steal this election now and gerrymander the maps as much as possible.
I'm just wondering, in you all's professional opinion, and Abba, I'll start with you. Do you think Democrats can manufacture enough seats, frankly, to counter what Republicans are doing? And I say that because the night of Tuesday's election, Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates, Don Scott, joined me, Alicia, and Michael on our late night coverage. And he talked about the seats that they gained in the Virginia House of Delegates. They literally came in with a 51-49 majority. They netted, I think, upwards of at least 64 seats. That was huge. But when we asked him about their redistricting efforts, he said that it's a process. We asked would the maps be ready for 2026. He said there is no map. Their maps won't be ready for 2026. Maryland is another case. Maybe, maybe not. Is the governor going to call a special session? Does he have the support? Where are there going to be enough seats? Or are these efforts, I don't want to say they're futile, but did Democrats get on the ball a little too late in some places and spaces to be able to counter what we know for sure is happening?
Well, look, I'll leave the politics to the politicians, but I'll tell you two things. One is that Democrats actually don't have to manufacture seats. Right now, we are in active litigation, as John said, in Texas, in Missouri. Those were unlawfully, illegally drawn map, and in Texas's case, a blatantly racially discriminatory map. So there's no reason to think that Democrats have to play that game, and they have not played that game, and they need not play that game. Even if they wanted to redraw maps in a way that was fair, they would not have to resort to the efforts that the Republicans have done. The other thing to remember is that in places like Texas and Missouri, and perhaps some of the other states that the Republicans are considering redrawing maps, they're drawing some pretty narrow margins for their incumbents here and for their congressional delegation. And that's a dangerous thing, particularly in light of what we just saw this week. So they are putting many of their own members at risk, and it's not a given that these are going to all float into the Republicans' direction. So I really don't think that the Democrats actually need to manufacture the way that the Donald Trump and the Republicans are trying to manufacture. The Democrats can use the law and use the tools that they have available to fight fire with fire, but also to do it on a lawful and even playing field.
Can we pull the map up one more time so we can just talk through it, John? Because you can see the states where you already have new maps that have been adopted: California, Texas, Missouri, North Carolina. You have states that are in progress like Utah, Ohio, Virginia. You got a bunch of states considering new maps. You got stalled efforts in some states. This is really hard to follow if you are not one of the Avengers who is on this every day or one of the redistricting nerds. I want to ask sort of an uncomfortable question, which is how much of this comes down to luck? How much of this comes down to they're getting their margins wrong, courts doing the right thing? It feels, if we're being honest, like there are a lot of variables at play all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think almost none comes down to luck for that reason alone. It's hard for us to track everything that you just described. I understand why it's hard for anybody to do and follow along each individual step, but we need to fight as hard as we can in every single state, right? And that's what I think you're seeing when you put that map up. There's nowhere up there that's vacant or that is not being explored or pursued. You know, frankly, when Donald Trump started this, I can't imagine he envisioned it would be fought as hard as it's being fought. I truly believe that he thought that this was going to be easy and he was going to roll over in Texas and get as many seats as he possibly could. Now, what we saw on Tuesday from an elections results perspective, to Abba's point, if you take just the trends, not even talking about demographics, just the trends that we saw, the shifts that we saw in Virginia, and you apply that to Texas, the Republicans are only winning 2 seats of the 5 that Donald Trump claimed he was taking, when he stood in front of Marine One and said, I'm going to take 5 seats for my party because they deserve them.